Welcome to EPG Pathashala. My name is Dugirala Vasanta. I am on the teaching faculty of Department of Linguistics, Osmania University, Hyderabad. My lecture today belongs to course 10, Psychoneurolinguistics. The topic is speech production with a focus on how sounds behave within words. In today's lecture, I will concentrate on 3 points. One is how different phonological representations are acquired by children, how sounds are learned and used as part of early words, and then I'll offer some examples from 1 or 2 Indian languages. You know from basic linguistics course that we make a distinction between phones, phonemes, features, syllables, and words. This is what I mean by representations. And I don't think I need to give you examples, but on the screen you will see phone is enclosed in square brackets because it's not established whether it is meaningful or not in a given language. Phoneme, on the other hand, is enclosed in slashes because we do that after doing phonological analysis and establishing phonemes of a given language. Then a whole lot of features make up the phonemes. So in this case, ka is a velar, and the velarity, the velar consonant combines with the vowel to become a syllable. So ka, ki, kai, these are all syllables. Then you have words, so syllables come together to form words like cat, kit, kite. So these are phonological representations. Now, in the 50s, Rowan Jakobson proposed a hierarchy of how these representations are learned by children. He also thought it is universal, that children world over always learn to make a distinction between oral sounds versus nasal sounds. That's the first contrast that children all over the world acquire. Once they're able to distinguish how air is coming out through the mouth cavity, they're all the oral sounds, and in the case of ma and na, nya, they're nasal sounds. Much of the air is coming through the nasal cavity. Once the distinction is acquired, they go to the next contrast, which according to him is obstruent versus sonorant. What is the main difference between obstruent and sonorant? In obstruents, which are basically stops, fricatives and affricates, we are stopping the air stream for few milliseconds, whereas in most sonorants, we don't stop the air stream. And also, in the speech perception module, you would have learned obstruents are not acoustically as, in terms of loudness, they're not as loud as sonorants. Sonorants are very loud. What are sonorants? Nasals, vowels, semivowels, laterals, trills. So, obstruent versus sonorant distinction is acquired by children. After that, they make a distinction between coronal, labial, dorsal, place of articulation. Whether we lift the tongue and make a coronal articulation by touching the palate, the, or whether we are making labials, ma, v, f, b, or dorsal articulations, back sounds, that place of articulation distinctions emerge. Next, they make a distinction between voiced and voiceless. And fifth, they make a distinction between stops and fricatives. And lastly, world over, he thought children continue to make mistakes between la and ra. Ra is the sound which is the most difficult according to the inventories that most textbooks tell us that children don't learn ra till they're 4 or 5 or even 6 years, or even the distinction between the fricatives th and the. So this is the hierarchy that Jakobson proposed. Now, why did he give this hierarchy? His point was that there are two principles. One is markedness principle, that sonorants are more marked than obstruents. And hence learnt later. In phonology class in linguistics, you would have learnt about marked and unmarked. Unmarked sounds are the ones which are more frequent in languages of the world. They are learnt earlier. They are easy to produce. whereas whatever is marked are learnt later. So markedness, according to markedness principle, children learn sounds, relatively rare sounds like, all the furs and thurs. There are not many words with that. They are not very common. So marked sounds are learnt later. So one explanation is markedness. Second explanation is implicational universals. That is, they studied hundreds of languages and they found that if any language has fricative sounds, it will also have stops. In other words, fricative is more complex. Fricative contains both stop process as well as release process. I mean, the air escapes slowly through the, making a little bit of noise. So, if a child can produce fricative, the child can also produce stops. So, implicational universal. Thirdly, stops are expected to be learnt earlier than fricatives, which are in turn learnt earlier than affricates. Again, there is a kind of articulatory complexity or ease or whatever it is, visibility. Children can see the stop sounds much more easier than the affricates and things like that. So, these are some of the explanations given to the so-called universal hierarchy of the way children learn sounds. But then again, more and more cross-linguistic research in phonology, how children acquire sounds, question this hierarchy. In Spanish, for instance, continuant, non-continuant distinction, that is fricatives versus stop distinction, is acquired much earlier than by English children. Right? And compared to even voiced and voiceless distinction. In Quiche Mayan language of Mexico, children I believe acquire affricate consonant ch much earlier than sh, which is acquired earlier than sh, acquired then earlier than pa, ta and ka, which sounds little odd because even in our languages, pa and ta are acquired earlier. So there is something, cross-linguistic research is going against Jacobson's universal hierarchy. Further, phonologists are also not able to talk about universals in acquiring sounds because there is a regression in child language. Children who are able to produce a sound or a sound contrast correctly, suddenly they start making mistakes. When they are older, they make mistakes. When they are younger, they don't make mistakes. How do you explain this? Right? This is a regression. And also, perception and memory factors were not considered sufficiently by phonologists in the past. Now, more and more researchers are paying attention to the role of perception in acquiring sounds and role of memory. Cross-linguistic variation in the so-called universal phonological features are explained, so what are the cross-linguistic features that did not agree with Jacobson's hierarchy? One is that languages differ tremendously in relation to dental and alveolar place of articulation. Dentals are much forward, alveolar is at the alveolar position, which is slightly behind. There is a whole range of sounds. In some languages, you have three-way distinction. Some languages, four-way distinction in place of articulation. And vowel harmony is another feature which works differently in different languages. Consonant gemination is present in Finnish, in Telugu. In many of our languages, we have pichi, kachi, kottu, long consonants. English doesn't have that. Phonotactic rules, like I explained in the speech perception modules, Telugu allows sa followed by ra, English does not allow. So, which consonant can follow which other consonant is language specific. This kind of cross-linguistic variation across languages makes variation in the way children acquire speech sounds and make words out of them. So, gemination especially is a very lot of research is coming up in recent years. Gemination falls at the junction between phonetics and phonology and demand a new conceptualization about the relationship. Remember, in the past 50s, 60s, 70s, decades of 50s, 60s, 70s, researchers thought phonetics is universal, phonology is language specific. They are two different things. And of course, you somehow make connection between the sound properties and mentally stored words, lexicon. So, you have phonetics, sound properties, phonology, the way sounds combine with each other in language specific way, and then you have lexicon, three different things. As opposed to that, that is the modular conceptualization, that they are all different modules. Alright. In other words, Jacobson's hierarchy assumes a modular view about phonological acquisition, that phonetics and phonology are separate from lexicon. Alright. To account for cross-linguistic differences, in recent years, researchers began to say we have to question that modular conception. It doesn't work. Alright. So, you see the picture on the screen now. You see that you have phonetics, phonology and lexicon are overlapping. All three of them are overlapping. So, this is a new way of looking at lexicon, phonetics, phonology interface, and unless you take this perspective, you cannot explain why there is so much variation in the way children are acquiring sounds and learning to use those sounds to make up words. So, this new idea of interface or interaction among phonetics, phonology and lexicon has informed a new theory called radical templatic phonology in the 90s. And in this view, theorization about phonological acquisition, that is phonemes, features, syllables, they exist. These constructs which have always been there as part of linguistics exist, but they are defined in terms of their role in word structure. That is, this new theory is saying the way phonemes and features and syllables behave within words in different languages is different. Every language have a particular word template. Phonemes and features behave differently within those word templates. In this new theory called radical templatic phonology, basic phonological word is word. Basic phonological unit is word. In the past, the basic one is phoneme. Here, we have moved to word. And we should examine variation in relation to speakers, dialects, utterances, context. How is it that children who understand words uttered by different speakers, different dialects, different type way of speaking in different contexts, they still go to the same meaning of that word? How is that possible? Your attention should be more to that rather than phonemes and features and whether they made this contrast or some other contrast which we discussed earlier. So, basically in this new way of looking at phonological acquisition, the focus should be on language use and not on language knowledge. I'm sure we are familiar with the notion of phonological processes that all small children below the age of 3 exhibit. When children are growing up, they are learning a language, they display simplifying processes. Adult words are simplified. Alright. Most children the child who cannot say sir will substitute sir with the. So, a Telugu word like sanchi, which means bag, becomes tanchi. Right. So, almost all children go through the stage where they exhibit phonological processes. Let's look at some important processes. Stopping. What is stopping? What I gave you just now. Substituting the for sa. If it is an English child, instead of saying see, the child says thi, because sa is not acquired yet. So, what is happening when sa is produced as the child is stopping the airstream when he or she should not be stopping. You should say s. the air should escape gradually. It should not be stopped. So this process is called stopping. That is, C becoming T is an example of phonological process called stopping, in which the airstream is stopped when it should not be stopped. Another process is called assimilation. An English speaking child, instead of saying duck, the child says guck. What exactly is happening? Here, the later occurring velar sound ka is influencing the first sound. Okay, instead of saying the, which requires moving the place of articulation, the child is staying with velar articulation. So, ka is velar, ga is velar. So, duck is becoming guck, because both ga and ka are of the same place. So, it's much simpler to stay at the same place than move the tongue quickly. So, duck becoming guck is called assimilation, and it's kind of regressive, like from back to. They can also exhibit forward assimilation. You can learn from the textbooks. The third major process children exhibit is fronting. So, instead of saying goat, the child will say dot. So, ga is a back sound, the is a front sound. Therefore, the process is called fronting. The child is fronting. So, then metathesis. Extremely common, even our children learning our languages exhibit metathesis. Metathesis is displacing the order of phonemes within words. So, instead of saying animal, the child says aminal. Alright. I can think of a child that I know in Telugu, instead of saying kavali, the child would say kalavi or something like that. So it's extremely common even in our languages. If you pay attention, I'm talking about 2 years, 2.5 years, small children. Cluster reduction is another process. Dress becoming des, or not desk but des. Involving pronouncing one segment of a word initial or word final cluster. That is dra, they could not say dra, so they remove ra out of it, so it becomes des. Or if you take desk, then they will say des by removing ka in the final position. So the clusters, which again, this remember, there are certain languages you cannot have a word with a cluster in the initial position, or there are languages in which you can't end words with clusters. Here, much of the examples I am giving you are from English, where clusters are possible. In certain languages, they are not possible. What is the implication of this? It means that in those languages where clusters are not allowed, children will not, there is no question of cluster reduction. So, phonological processes are language specific. Final consonant deletion. So, there are a lot of English speaking children don't say the final consonant. Bike becomes by. It may sound awkward, but it's extremely commonly reported phonological process among English speaking children. And in all my research, my colleagues' research in the department on phonological processes in Telugu, we never come across final consonant deletion. Telugu children don't delete final consonant. So the point that I'm trying to make is, we learn about simplifying processes, but they're all language specific. Languages, phonotactic regularities, or which phonemes are more frequent, which are not more frequent. This kind of language specific features influence the way children learn sounds and use those sounds within words. So, the conclusion is phonological processes are language specific. They notice till now we have given most of the examples I have given focusing on consonant, but phonological processes can also involve vowels. They can also involve prosodic features like stress. They are governed by language specific considerations, not only in terms of phoneme inventories, syllable structures, word templates. That is just now I explained to you what kind of consonant is allowed in a language. Chinese, Japanese, you can't have clusters, they don't allow. let us look at some phonological processes in Hindi speaking children. So, chawal, the child, chawal, which you all know is rice, the child says chabal, alright. From roti, the child is saying roti. So, fronting. Ta is at the back, ta is in front, so it's fronting. In chabal, basically stopping. Assimilation, saboon, the child is saying mamoon. So, the na, nasal sound saboon, na is influencing the non-nasal sa, and the whole thing is becoming nasal, mamoon. Ghas is becoming gash. The aspiration is gone, sa is become sha. So, it is backing. Remember from your speech perception module, the sha is more front, sa is more back, palatally. So, the child is preferring to say gash as opposed to ghas. Metathesis. Chipkeli is pronounced by the child as chikepli. So, there is a reversal of the order of the constituents, order of the phonemes within words. Gliding. Tala, lock. The child is saying taya. La is retroflex lateral is replaced by the semi-vowel ya, taya, which is simpler. So, it's called gliding. Ya is glide, therefore, phonological process is called gliding. Sabji, vegetable, the child is saying chepji. So, again here this affrication problem is there. So, but if you stare at this child's pronunciations, the overall shape of the word is there. Only something is happening to the sounds within words. That's why in my title of this lecture I said sounds in words. So, what happens to the way children utter sounds within words? You look at it, the template is maintained. So, if you take the chawal becoming chabal, why is this called stopping? Because the child, instead of producing the fricative ver, is stopping. It's quite obvious, right? Same thing with saboon, maboon, I have already explained to you, assimilation is taking place, right? Because na is influencing the production of a non-nasal sa, and everything is becoming nasal. It's a regressive assimilation, right? So, basically about phonological processes, the point that I am trying to stress in this lecture is we have to pay attention to perception, which early phonologists ignored. We cannot take a child form and go on analyzing it as though perception has no influence on production. Whereas I am saying we have to look at perception based phonological theories, which are more recent. According to these relatively new theories, the pattern of emergence of features or phonemes is modified by the input from the environment. What is it that the child is exposed to? What kind of sounds and what kind of words and how much is being spoken to the child? Therefore, we must examine phonetic, phonological and lexical factors together. Remember the diagram I showed you earlier? There is a phonetic thing, there is a phonology module and there is lexicon module, but all of them are interacting. So, when we are trying to analyze the mistakes children make, don't just take out what is coming out of the child's mouth and go on analyzing it and give it a name. Stopping, fronting, that's not enough. That's just a production based analysis. What I am trying to stress here is you also have to connect it up to perception and input and what kind of early words this child is exposed to, lexicon. So, recent research has shown that many sounds and sound sequences present even during babbling appear in early words. Remember, babbling happens at the age of 6 months. Children say papa, papa, da, 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 blah, blah, like they just babble. But research are saying that babbling stage is continuous. There is a continuum between babbling and first words. There is some correlation between babbling and first words. When do the first words occur? According to Western textbooks, they say first words appear at 18 months. But many data from Indian languages, our children start speaking their first meaningful words as early as 12 months or 14 months. So, there is a continuation between babbling and first words is what they are saying. In other words, stored representations get integrated in perception and production. So, when they are babbling, some of those syllables, those representations are there in the child's mind, and then the child keeps hearing input. So, a child who perhaps uttered some sounds which are not part of his language when he is 6 months old will drop out those sounds and will stick to sounds which are part of his native language, what he is hearing at home, if there is only one language. Alright. So, stored representations, the child combines the stored representations with the perception and production. In other words, the child's cognitive development, the development is speaking not only in terms of the way the child moves the lips or the tongue or the jaw or the articulators. The child's cognition is developing, memory is improving, attention is able to focus more as the child grows. So, the cognitive processes like attention, memory and even sensory motor knowledge, the moment the child becomes a toddler, 2 years, starts walking out of the house, the language comes out. So, the sensory motor knowledge, the memory, the attention, all these processes impinge on the way sounds are acquired and used meaningfully within words by children. So, in other words, there is an interaction between phonology and lexicon. Babbling supports phonological development by interfacing attention, perception and sensory motor processes underlying early words. Phonological development is non-linear. We cannot, like Jacobson talked about, that it's linear. Easy sounds are first and more difficult sounds come later. There are stages. That linearity is now questioned. It's non-linear. That's why we are able to explain about a child who said a sound correctly when he is younger, a little later he makes a mistake. That regression can be explained within this new way of looking at phonology. We need to measure the complexity of word structures in child language. The newly proposed measure, 1 or 2 measures, I'll give you examples, work it out for you with 1 or 2 words. But what would be very nice is take these measures, apply it to data from Hindi or any other languages, Indian languages that you know, and start collecting data and analyzing data using these measures. One measure is called Phonological Mean Length of Utterance, for short PMLU, Phonological Mean Length of Utterance. What is PMLU? PMLU is a count of number of sounds in a word plus number of consonants. Do you see what I am saying? So, let us take the original, what I read to prepare this lecture. I got the example from Finnish, but it doesn't matter. Let us look at a Finnish example called Vene. I believe in Finnish, Vene means boat. Now, this is a correct adult target, Vene. In Vene, you see how many sounds are there? 4, right? V-E-N-E. So, take 4. There are 4 different sounds. Then add consonants. How many consonants are there in Vene? V and N, 2. So, Vene has a PMLU of 6. Right? Now, suppose the word is, the Finnish word is traktori. Tractor. It's a much difficult word. So, let's see how many sounds are there. T-R-A-C-T-O-R, 8. So, take 8. How many consonants are there? T-R-K-T-R, different consonants, okay, 5. So, 8 plus 5 is 13. So, tractory has a PMLU of 13. Number of different sounds, number of consonants. You add those two, you get PMLU. Suppose you have a small child, 2-year-old child learning Finnish. Instead of saying Vene, the child says Nene. Alright? Now by using PMLU, we can say when the child says, Nene, let's do the PMLA count. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 different sounds. Only N is there. So add 1 for consonant. So you get 5. Since only one consonant in the target is pronounced correctly. Let's look at one more measure. Proportion of whole word proximity. PWP. Okay. This is calculated by dividing PMLU, which I have already explained to you, by that is child's PMLU by adult PMLU. We've been talking about, I gave you the example of Finnish words. The child mispronounced Vene as Nene. So you have two numbers. One is the adult target and one is the child's PMLU. Divide one by the other, you get PWP. So, for the second word, that lactoli, the child said for a tractory, the PWP would be 9 by 13, which will be 0.69. You go back and check it out by yourself later on. Then the third one is called proportion of whole word correctness, PWC. This is calculated by dividing total number of words the child produces correctly by the number of words in the sample. So you collect for few minutes, total number of words you have. Out of that, what the child produced correctly, you divide both, you get proportion of whole word correctness. So PMLU, PWP, PWC are some of the new measures that child phonologists are using these days to find out about phonological development. So until now we are going on saying word. No, but what is a word? Word in English, you get any number of simple monosyllabic words. Mostly they're all monosyllables. But outside of English, you may not get cat, mat, bat kind of words. Right? We have already talked about this. In Telugu, everything is CV. So you have Kalu, Balu, Malu, Chettu. They're not, they always have 2 syllables. So, but there is no need to equate word with monosyllable outside of English. Disyllables dominate early vocabularies of lots of languages: Estonian, Finnish, French, Hebrew, Hindi, Japanese, Spanish, Swedish, Welsh. All these languages have lot more bisyllables than monosyllables, and therefore much of the theorizing is about monosyllables, but we need to now do more work on languages which are very different from English to understand how sounds evolve, how children make use of the sounds within words. So, commonly occurring words have the structure. I have already mentioned this to you, CV in Telugu. So, to come to the end of my lecture today about sounds in words, how children learn sounds, 2 main points. Language learners are sensitive to, very early on, children become sensitive to phonotactic regularities, which govern the kind of words which are allowed in a given language. There certain sounds can occur in the initial position of a word, certain sounds are banned in the final position, or those are phonotactics. So, according to a new, relatively new theory, I introduce you radical templatic phonology, which is described by Croft and Wieman. I've given the reference in the e-text. Please read the original article. Children develop implicit phonological grammar out of the words they learn as wholes, as words. Alright? Since word is identified by the child as the same by its meaning in the context of its use, that is, the child very early remembers the word as a whole. So, whenever it is used by grandmother, by mother, or it is outside or in the school, the child is able to remember that word, and therefore the focus should be, the unit of analysis should be word and not feature or a phoneme or a syllable. This particular point is explained very well in using Hindi data in the e-text. So, I urge you to look at the Hindi data in the e-text to try and understand this new theory. I hope you understood the main points of my lecture, but do consult the e-text if you have any doubts. Thank you.